In a museum at Oxford University sits a clay prism covered in ancient writing. It measures about 8 inches tall and lists every king who ever ruled ancient Sumer. Scholars have used this document for over a century to reconstruct the timeline of Mesopotamian civilization. The historical sections are remarkably accurate, but there is a problem. Before the verified kings, the list describes 8 rulers who governed before a great flood swept over the earth. Their combined reign lengths total 241,200 years. Most historians dismiss this section as mythology. Then, archaeologists started digging beneath Mesopotamian cities. 11 feet below the surface at Uruk, they found a layer of sterile flood sediment separating 2 completely different worlds. So before this story pulls you under, consider subscribing, and don't forget to like this video. The object is called the Weld-Blundell Prism. Herbert Weld purchased it in 1923 from a dealer near the ancient city of Larsa in modern Iraq. The prism dates to approximately 1800 BCE. Each of its 4 sides is covered in neat rows of cuneiform script. The text begins simply. When kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. What follows is a methodical accounting of rulers, cities, and reign lengths. For historical periods, these records align remarkably well with archaeological evidence. Kings mentioned appear in inscriptions found at their cities. Battle records match. Building projects correspond to time frames given. This is a document ancient scribes took seriously as a factual record. Then you reach the section troubling modern scholars. 8 kings ruled before the flood. Alulim of Eridu reigned for 28,800 years. Alalgar ruled for 36,000 years. The list continues through 5 cities: Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sippar, Shuruppak. The final pre-flood king, Ubara Tutu, ruled 18,600 years before the flood swept over. The scribes made no distinction between myth and history. The pre-flood kings received the same formatting, the same matter-of-fact tone. To Sumerians writing in the 21st century BCE, both sections represented their understanding of the past. The flood was not metaphor. It was the dividing line of their entire historical framework. In 1929, British archaeologist Leonard Woolley was excavating the royal cemetery at Uruk in southern Iraq. His team had already uncovered the gold headdress of Queen Puabi and mass graves of sacrificed attendants. But Woolley wanted to go deeper. At about 40 feet down, they hit something unexpected: a layer of clean silt. No pottery shards, no animal bones, no evidence of human presence. The deposit measured roughly 11 feet thick. Pure water laid the sediment. Below this sterile layer, they found human habitation again. But the pottery styles were different. The burial practices had changed. An entirely different people had lived there. Woolley sent a telegram to his wife. "We have found the flood." He believed he had uncovered physical evidence of the deluge described in the Sumerian king list. Other sites reported similar findings. At Kish, Stephen Langdon found flood deposits dating to approximately 3,100 BCE. At Shuruppak, where Sumerian tradition placed the flood survivor Ziu Sudra, researchers found catastrophic flooding around 2,900 BCE. At Uruk, flood strata appeared in the deepest levels. These deposits do not all date to the same period. The layer at Uruk predates Kish by centuries. Critics argued these were local river floods, not one global event. But perhaps the Sumerians were preserving memory of repeated catastrophes. Multiple devastating floods over centuries of oral tradition were eventually compressed into a single narrative. In 1997, geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman proposed a theory that reframed everything. They had spent years studying core samples from the Black Sea floor. Around 7,600 years ago, the Black Sea was a freshwater lake, smaller and lower than today. Communities lived along its shores. Then, rising Mediterranean waters breached the natural dam at the Bosporus. Salt water poured through at roughly 10 cubic miles per day. The force equaled 200 Niagara Falls. The shoreline advanced a mile daily. Sonar mapping reveals ancient shorelines now hundreds of feet underwater. Communities watched the water rise impossibly fast. The only option was flight. Those refugees scattered in all directions, carrying memory of the day the waters ended everything they knew. The Atrahasis epic, recorded on clay tablets now in the British Museum, describes what supposedly caused the flood. Humanity had grown too numerous, and the noise disturbed the god Enlil. He sent plague, then drought, then famine. When none of those measures reduced the population sufficiently, he resolved to wipe them out with a flood. Only the god Enki warned a pious man named Atrahasis to build a boat, to save his family, and to preserve animals and craftsmen. The flood lasted 7 days and 7 nights. When the waters receded, survivors emerged into a scoured world. Civilization had to be rebuilt from nothing. The parallels to the Hebrew account are unmistakable, but Sumerian versions predate Hebrew scriptures by more than 1,000 years. What does archaeology tell us about the world before the flood deposits? The Ubaid period, from 6,500 BCE to 3,800 BCE, represents the foundation culture of Mesopotamian civilization. At Eridu, occupational layers date to 5,400 BCE. 17 temple structures built atop one another show continuous religious practice. Pottery from Eridu appears at sites hundreds of miles away. These were accomplished people. Irrigation agriculture, specialized craft production, social hierarchies. Yet they left no writing, no king lists. Whatever stories they told, none survived in their own words. The only record comes from Sumerians who came after, looking back across the gap of the flood. Around 8,200 years ago, something catastrophic happened to global climate. Glaciologists call it the 8.2 kiloyear event. A glacial lake the size of Lake Superior breached its ice dam. Lake Agassiz released enormous quantities of fresh water into the North Atlantic. Ocean circulation patterns were disrupted. Temperatures dropped several degrees over decades. In the Near East, this brought severe drought first. Then, rainfall returned in catastrophic abundance. Floods swept through valleys that had been drought-stricken. The archaeological record shows widespread site abandonment. Communities that thrived for centuries disappeared. Were the Sumerians preserving genuine historical memory of a world that ended before theirs began? Current research suggests they were. Not a memory of a single supernatural deluge, not impossibly long-lived kings, but memory of catastrophic disruption, communities destroyed, cultures erased. Memory transformed through generations until it became the story of the Great Flood. The Sumerians understood their civilization as a continuation, a rebuilding after loss. The flood marked the boundary between a previous world and their own. 4,000 years later, we are still reading what they wrote. The Weld-Blundell Prism sits in its climate-controlled case. The cuneiform is still sharp enough to read. The king names are still pronounceable. Alulim, Alalgar, Ubaratutu. The flood swept over. Kingship descended from heaven once more. The question is not whether the flood was literally global. It was not. The question is whether the Sumerians correctly identified that a catastrophic break had occurred in human history, that the world before was genuinely different from the world after. The evidence increasingly suggests they were right, not in the details, but in the essence. Something ended. Something else began. And 4,000 years ago, scribes in ancient Iraq decided this was important enough to preserve for whoever might read their words in some unimaginable future. We are that future, and we are still reading.